With TSN Hockey Insider, one half of the Rain Dregs Hockey Podcast, our Wednesday regular, the one and only Darren Dreger. How are you?
Yeah, doing okay. I mean, you've got a lot going on industry-wide, certainly in the National Hockey League with the conclusion of the Stanley Cup Final. And a tip of the hat to Ray Ferraro, who, I wouldn't call it a bold prediction, but anyone who pre-series says it will be Vegas in 5, I mean, that's stepping out there a little bit. I mean, Vegas was the best team, there's no doubt, and they've proved that time and time again through their march to the Stanley Cup Championship, which concluded last night. But, man, he called it in 5. We understand now, we can appreciate just how dire the situation was health-wise for the Florida Panthers. I just wish that they'd found a way to close the gap a little bit. And I'm not talking about games. I mean, Vegas was going to win this series. Doesn't matter if it's in Game 5 or Game 6, but to end that thing the way it ended last night, so lopsided. And you can't blame the Golden Knights. I mean, until that buzzer sounds, you got to play, and it's instinctual as a player. If the puck is loose at the net, you're going to throw it into the net. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do. So it was a little bit tarnishing, too bad that it ended up the way it did, Game 5.
Couple of questions off the Cup Final. 2 of the last 3 teams now have been very deep into LTIR with the way they have structured roster. And this is yet another income state tax, or no income tax state that wins. Is the NHL looking at either of those items long term?
Well, the taxation one is a tough nut to crack, right? Because where do you start and where does it end? At the end of the day, isn't that one of the perks of unrestricted free agency? Or if you have an opportunity to get traded and you get traded to Florida, or you get traded to Dallas, or you get traded to Vegas or Nashville, I mean, there are benefits, business benefits that legitimately have been in play for as long as those teams have been around. The one that I keep chewing on and I keep poking around, and as soon as you're dismissed by the higher powers at head office of the National Hockey League, you know you're on to something. When they're like, nope, we're not talking about that. I tried to get around it. It was either at the Board of Governors meetings in December or the March GM meetings, but I think it was the GM meetings in Florida. The idea where there's at least a small group of general managers wanted it discussed, if not in the big room, in one of their breakaways, the possibility of carrying over a salary cap into the playoffs. Now, would it be as restrictive as the regular season salary cap? I don't know. I don't know how you'd play around with that. But at least with a small group of individuals, general managers, there seemed to be an appetite to have that discussion. And I followed up on it in Florida, and there was no discussion on that. And I've asked the commissioner's office about it, and I get the same response that, no, it's not really an item that's ever seriously discussed. And I guess the only reason why would be it would have to be collectively bargained. So if you're going to do something that substantial to the collective bargaining agreement, then you're going to have to entice the Players Association to get involved.
Yeah. See, the likelihoods for me are reversed from you, Darren, because I think, you know what? The player pushback, if you can convince a player to sit out for 6 months of the season or 3-4 months of the season for salary, I mean, good on you. I think most players would be like, no, I'm getting on the ice. I'm ready to go now. Yeah. So if those circumstances align, I guess, okay. But to me, you've had profit sharing before in this league.
You've had equalization payments.
Yes,
before.
so
you still do.
So to me, having an equation that makes the state tax sort of neither here nor there, to me that seems doable. That's just math, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm with you, and I'm not dismissing any of this. I know how both sides operate and function. Until very recently, I've had major player agents who still believe that there's a possibility that the salary cap would go up by more than $1 million. And consistently we're reminded, including very recently by Bettman, that no, that's not going to happen because the Players Association aren't willing to adjust the escrow limits. So it can't happen. Well, it can happen if the PA entices the NHL into doing it with purpose. But that's where the fly in the ointment always comes in something that feels, seems, sounds like common sense.
Right.
When you're dealing with discrepancy, isn't with the lawyers of the PA and the National Hockey League, because they know what the binding CBA looks like and they know what it's going to take to kind of open that thing up and get back at it to reach a different agreement.
Moving on to the Vancouver Canucks, Darren, look, we've read and talked for months here about trying to move salary out on guys like Garland and Besser. The guy we haven't talked about as much is Anthony Beauvillier. And he might be the easiest piece to move because he's just got the 1 year left. He's a $4.1 million salary, but he's roughly at market value there and has a terrific, and has a terrific playoff resume. So, what are you hearing? And might they boil down to, look, we've got to trade this guy because the other guys are just
it's an exit ramp. It is a exit ramp. You know, like you need to.
It could boil down to that. I mean, that could be fair because all the names that you've mentioned are the names that I've been told are legitimately in play and players that Patrick Alvin wants to talk about. Beauvillier is interesting because the term is manageable and the resume shows exactly what you said, that he can be an effective player. So where do you go with that? When you look at the needs of the Vancouver Canucks, you see it on defense, and we know that they covet a third line center. But if that guy remains Scott Laughton, or there's another piece that you want to realize via trade, because you kill two birds with one stone, you're moving out some salary cap influence, unless the player coming back, is making more, then that causes an issue you're going to have to remedy. I just think that collection, Beauvillier included, are the players that we should be talking about and speculating on, because those are the players that the Vancouver Canucks are talking about as well. I always leave the door open a little bit, though. And there's been a lot of traction around Scott Laughton and Travis connecting with the Philadelphia Flyers, because we know the Flyers are in rebuild mode. But those are players that Briere doesn't really want to talk about. He's willing to listen and talk about them. So maybe we got to dig a little bit deeper with the Vancouver Canucks. Like, who are the players that Vancouver doesn't really want to move, right, but is willing to consider? I had a team ask me about Thatcher Demko the other day again. And we've been down this road with Demko before. Yeah. We have been. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And it frankly could have been this team just, trying to put its goaltending lists together and wondering and not connecting that team to the Vancouver Canucks. But I do think that as we get closer to the draft, with everything that's swirled around the league in trade talk, not speculation, trade talk manager to manager, I'm pretty sure that there are players that are likely available in Vancouver that aren't being shopped, but at least Alvin and company are willing to listen.
And the Golden Knights only complicating the goaltending market because they won the Stanley Cup with Adin Hill. And this is all due respect to Adin Hill, who was wonderful, but it's another example of, do you need a Vezina Trophy nominee to win the Stanley Cup? It can help, or you can get the hot goalie, and that can work as well. But let's combine the two.
He's UFA, and he was the fifth guy to start games for them this year.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. Let's combine the two thoughts here, though. Can the Canucks now, and George might need a couple of days, or Kelly McCrimmon might need a couple of days here to get their stuff, but they have to address the salary cap issue that they have, too, don't they, going forward? Is there a trade partner there in the Vegas Golden Knights who might want to move some salary around themselves? And again, they'll need a couple of days to get their house in order. But are the Golden Knights a prime team to be moving salary around here this summer?
Well, they're always a prime team, and not just through necessity. I mean, they know the rules and they know that they have to comply. So their eye will continue to be on the prize, and that's the one that they were handed over last night. So how do you get there? The salary cap is just a nuisance. They've proven time and time again there are ways to not manipulate, because that suggests that they're doing things that are unsavory. Well, they might be from a popularity perspective, but not from a play of getting the work done and improving your roster and doing everything possible, harsh or otherwise, to accomplish that goal. So I know, look at the Philadelphia trade with LA and Columbus, where Provorov ends in Columbus. I can tell you that McCrimmon would not have been happy with that deal. He collects those players, right? Mark Stone and the Western Canadian kids, especially if you're a Brandon Wheat King, then you're near and dear to Kelly McCrimmon's heart. So I know he would have had interest in Provorov. Well, how do you make that deal fit? Well, you do it because you've got a supportive owner and you're a creative management group that can just figure it out and find a way. So I don't doubt for a second that McCrimmon will be heavily engaged in the days and the weeks ahead. And they've got some pieces that they're going to have to wrestle with. Barbashev turned out to be a real nice ad for the Vegas Golden Knights. He did. And I don't think that should come as a surprise to anyone else. But if you can get Barbashev in that 4.5 range or slightly above, around 5, I think you have to try and find a way. So that's the challenge of the Vegas Golden Knights.
Golden Knights picking 32nd in the draft, but you watch, they'll move up for Nate Danielson, Brandon Wheat King centerman in the first round.
They'll try.
Yeah. Sure. Dregs, the first buyout window opens Friday. Are you hearing any names? Do you think we're going to see buyouts as soon as Friday or early next week?
Yeah, I think we probably will. Early next week, yeah. I mean the team that I'm fixated on is Winnipeg, right? And there's been lots of speculation around the trading possibilities with the big name guys, Hellebuck and Pierre-Luc Dubois and Mark Scheifele. What are they going to end up doing with Blake Wheeler? And maybe it's early, but Blake Wheeler is a heck of a hockey player. He's got a real solid career. Could he help a team? Yes, I think he can in a more limited capacity than what was needed in Winnipeg. But to facilitate that trade, doesn't it feel like you're going to have to retain a chunk or apply a sweetener or both to find a trade fit? Or is a buyout just easier and cleaner? And I'm leaning towards the buyout. You guys know in Vancouver, ownership doesn't like having that dead money on the books. They don't. They put it on management, find a way to keep the books clean. But there are times where you get into situations where you don't really have a choice, and that could be the case with Blake Wheeler in Winnipeg.
Yeah, it's a 5-team trade list for Wheeler, so he's particularly difficult to trade unless he gives them 5 teams that has oodles of cap space, right? But otherwise, I hear what you're saying. You mentioned the Kings, Dregs. They seem like they're going to be one of the aggressive teams this summer. They seem like they're done with everybody talking about, what a flush prospect pipeline they have and all these right-shot young defensemen.
Right.
And they seem like they're going to maybe take some of those younger assets and picks and turn them into something a little more tangible for a cup run next year. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that is fair, Matt. But that's just a continuation and extension of where Rob Blake and the Los Angeles Kings were last season. He made it clear early in the year that, they were taking a very bold and aggressive approach, knowing that, the window for Anze Kopitar and some of their older players is rapidly closing. That's just father time grabbing hold. But I'm more interested in, what is the fence that Rob Blake is swinging for here? Is he trying to hit one to the warning track? Is he trying to hit a homer, or is he trying to hit a grand slam? And then you start looking at some of the possibilities, and you look at Winnipeg. When I look at the goalie market, even though they've got goaltending in LA, why wouldn't LA be interested in Connor Hellebuck? Now, in terms of conference division, I guess Winnipeg would have some concerns with all of that. But I think the Winnipeg Jets are in a position where they've got to make the best deal possible, a deal that keeps them competitive and also builds for a productive future. So in saying that, I think that there are some big possibilities. And that prospect pool in LA is pretty strong. It really is.
The coaching carousel has continued with a lot of these jobs being filled, some of them from within. I think the Calgary decision perked up some eyebrows, particularly from if you're going to promote from within, why not Mitch Love?
Yeah.
And it ends up being Huska. First of all, just have you been surprised by Laviolette or whomever so far? And when do the other decisions happen, do you think, i.e. Toronto or anywhere else?
Yeah, well, look, this is my opinion on Toronto. I just feel like as aggressive a manager as Brad Treliving is, he's been on the job in Toronto 2 weeks. I feel like if he was making that coaching change, he would have done it by now. So there's a couple of ways to read that. Is there no one better in his estimation available in the market? Maybe that's what it is. Is he intrigued enough in the ability of Sheldon Keefe based on the information that has been collected to this point that he wants to get to know him better? I think that's probably more to the point. So it just feels, in my opinion, that if he were going to make that change, he would have made it now. I suspect that Sheldon Keefe will be on the bench for the Maple Leafs, but maybe that leash is relatively short. Let's see how things go in the first half of the regular season. As for the process with the New York Rangers and the Calgary Flames, in Calgary's case, I got a lot of time for Ryan Huska. I think he's ready to be an NHL coach. But I also think that timing was perfect for the Calgary Flames to promote Ryan Huska. They've got Darryl Sutter on the books at better than $8 million. There comes a point where ownership just says, okay, enough. We got to pull in here financially. And I think they did that with Conroy, who's also deserving of his post as GM, and now with Ryan Huska. And in New York, James Dolan, ownership of the New York Rangers, heavily involved there. And I'm not saying he didn't love the idea of Peter Laviolette. He might have loved Laviolette, and Chris Drury pushed back a little bit and said, okay, well, John Hines is available. I know John well. We've got a history together. Let's give that some consideration. So oftentimes it's the timing of these hires and, who's involved and who isn't involved. And in the case of Calgary and New York, I know the owners were involved there.
We know well about owners hiring coaches in this market. Yes.
Lastly, Drags, the Ottawa Senators have now sold. It is to the preferred bidder, Michael Andelauer, who you flagged with us weeks ago. Didn't quite hit $1 billion, and the Melnick family's going to retain a stake. So tells you they didn't quite get to the finish line they were hoping to get to, and it was a lengthy process. How much do you think the pressure that was coming from fans and politicians and media in Ottawa saying, hey, let's get this thing done with and into the off season with new ownership, how much do you think that played a role in finally getting this thing resolved?
I think it played a role. I think what played a more significant role, though, is, I would, whether it was Andelauer or someone else involved in the ownership bids, they basically called it, maybe as early as the weekend to say, okay, we're not continuing to be part of a dragged out process here. We're now down to 2, and really that was the Kimmel family and the Andelauer group. Make the call and do it in the next 72 hours, or maybe the bid process is going to stall because we're all going to pull the pin on this thing. So I think the banks that were involved in the negotiating process, the lawyers representing the Melnick estate, and clearly the National Hockey League got together and said, all right, we need to make a decision and we need finality. Let's conclude this process. And I'm not at all surprised that it ends up being Michael Andelauer. He developed his group that created a financial empire. Not that Andelauer is incapable financially. He's a very wealthy man, very successful business person. But I think it did speak to the familiarity and the comfort from an NHL standpoint, too. I mean, this guy is close with probably all of the members of the executive committee who will rubber stamp this. It goes to full board. The board won't have any problem approving. And Andelauer also has good relationships with the commissioner's office. All of that helps because it provides peace of mind to all of those constituents, knowing that the organization and the buildup of the organization, from a real estate perspective, new building, all of that is in good hands. So this makes the most sense.
Great stuff, Dregs. Thanks for the time here today. We'll catch up next Wednesday.
Okay, guys, be well.
This great clip brought to you by, wait for it, Great Clips. It's going to be great.